Good afternoon, everyone. Just welcoming everyone in. I think we've got a few more people in the lobby. Thanks for your patience while we get everyone in, and then we'll make a start in a minute. Okay. Perfect. So just as we're going then, we have got some NCFE staff in the background here who will be admitting for anyone who is waiting in the lobby. So thank you all very much for coming today. We are here today to talk about navigating skills, funding, devolution, opportunities and strategies, and we're very pleased to have you with us. So this session that we have today is a follow-up session to a webinar, to a workshop that we delivered at ATC. And we're very lucky and very pleased today to have back our presenters. So on the NCFE team today, we have myself as product manager for NCFE, Andy Barton, also product manager here at NCFE. We also have the two panelists that we're going to be focusing on for this session. So the majority of this session is going to be questions and discussion. So we're hoping quite a natural discussion as we go through, asking some of the questions that came off the back of that workshop that we delivered. So there's quite a few questions that had come from the audience during the session and following that session, which we're hoping to expand on a little bit and really tease out to explore some of those opportunities of where they've actually been used in practice. So our two panelists, John Winder and Stuart Allen, they're going to be going through the sort of background to what they've done with devolution. So there'll be opportunities to ask questions yourselves as well as we go along. And we'll also have space at the end to ask some additional questions, because I'm sure there'll be lots of things that come up as a result of the questions and discussions that we're having that you'd like to explore in a little bit more detail. So what we'll be covering in today's session, today's aims are to provide an overview of devolution and the current landscape, which Andy Barton in just a second will take us through. We're going to be exploring provision alignment with local and regional needs, how that has gone about for our two panelists, and different ideas of how that could be built for the future as well. Flexible delivery models through these real world examples, and opening space for discussion and sharing best practice. So as mentioned, we're hoping this is going to be more of a facilitative discussion towards that point at the end. So, if you do have any questions, pop them in the chat or raise your hand as well at the end, and we'll be able to go through those questions and sort of discuss some of them in a little bit more detail. We don't want this to be a one-way process. So you'll be leaving today with an improved understanding of how devolved adult skills funding shapes delivery and growth, practical strategies, as we talked about, those real-world examples that will be brought in, and some flexible and practical approaches for how skills delivery might be implemented. So this will be suitable for anyone who already works with devolution or people who are looking at just getting into using devolved budgets. So if I just hand over to Andy Barton, he'll talk you through a brief introduction of devolved devolution and where we've been going in this particular funding space.
Great. Thanks, MZ. Yeah, welcome everybody to this session. So I'd say we don't want this to be a presentation and just a talking to you sort of webinar, but I just want to lay some sort of foundations of where we've started this process from within NCFE and what's happening across the strategic landscape. So obviously in December 2024, the English devolution white paper was published. And obviously that was looking at the expansion of devolution, and it is a key strategic priority for this government, and it is moving with speed, with more local authorities gaining those devolution sort of landscape within their regions, just as late as 1st of May. In the local elections, we know there's been some more Mayoral Combined Authorities coming on board that will have devolution deals moving forward, and it is going to move further and further and quickly as we go through. And it just, like you say, tackling those local needs and local skills needs within the specific regions. One of the things we looked at in devolution as well, and this was an article in an FA Week, and a little bit around, which we'll cover later on, around the reduction in some of the funding pots. But actually we still see an underspend in adult skills fund, both nationally and regionally. But the regions and MCAs are much better at spending their adult skills fund than actually within the DFA managed national fund pot. So, but that still means there is a big opportunity for more learners, for providers to address the skills needs in their areas. The impact of devolution is say three different sets of stakeholders. So there is a big impact on education providers. Obviously, it does give funding flexibility in devolved regions where we can fund sort of programs of learning, regulated qualifications that wouldn't necessarily get funded nationally. So it does give that flexibility around what programs you can offer. We've got a tailored program design, really strong collaboration with employers in there, and capacity building and building your offer to align to the devolved region you're delivering in. Also benefits for learners. So again, makes it more relevant and accessible. The opportunities that's there for the learners to advance in their careers, gain employment, or just upskill in the areas they want to upskill in. Supporting the disadvantaged learners through the new skills rules. And again, just really honing in on those learners to meet the skills gaps in their regions. And then obviously the back of that should, within the local region, create good economic growth, really build the sectors that are working in those regions. It's in not every region will have priorities in all sectors, and this allows those local regions to tackle their own skills gaps. And then finally, it's all about collaboration. I know we'll hear a little bit about this from the panelists through the questioning, but actually it is about that collaboration to align to those industry needs. You have to collaborate with employers and the sectors that you're working in to ensure that you are meeting those skills gaps within their regions. Innovating and adapting your provision to meet those and to make them fit for purpose, and a one size fits all isn't necessarily what's right. And you can build that through that collaboration with all the key stakeholders in those regions. And we know that the regions will have local skills improvement plans, they'll have their skills strategies. It's a good place to start to really hone in and understand what the needs are in those devolved regions. So that's all I wanted to cover to start off with. So I'm going to pass it back over to MG for the panel discussions. And then into the first question.
That's great. Thank you very much, Andy. So if we could start off, if we go for Stuart first, if that's all right, and then obviously we'll have more of a discussion once you've both spoken about this. So obviously we spoke at the ATC about the benefits that devolution have brought. We can look at the challenges as well, which we will do. But could you share possibly one or two standout examples of where devolved funding's really made a difference? So possibly a course that you've been able to launch or expand on, developing new collaborations, that sort of thing. Anything that would not have been possible in the previous landscape, but perhaps has been made possible by the change. Stuart, if we could go to you first, possibly.
Yeah, of course. So a couple of examples I can share is some work we did in Salford in Greater Manchester Combined Authority, and in Leeds in West Yorkshire. So we'll start with Leeds. Although this was a Department for Education gap process, the funding that was through the gap process went to Leeds City Council because they clearly justified that, like most areas in the country, there is a really clear young people's NEET problem, where we've got far too many young people who are so talented, are so incredible, but are broken because of their lives to date, whether that's through their previous education, their communities, their families, whatever it is. They are unfortunately in a position where they're disengaged and making pretty poor decisions, bless them. So we were able to, through that devolved money, step into Leeds, set up 4 venues very quickly, a lot quicker than perhaps. And this is a criticism, but because we're an ITP, we're able to because we've got facilities across the country, we were able to set up very quickly a 16 to 18 NEET provision, which offered a 12-week program to some of the hardest to reach young people in the city. and really develop a program that was around the behaviours and attitudes for work, and then give them some technical skills that underpin jobs within the area that we knew were recruiting, particularly entry-level jobs, in the way of saying to these young people, come into this environment, we do a fantastic 12-week, we will try and deal with some of the emotional baggage and the models of behaviour and all the stuff that is creating and manifesting in this behaviour, and we'll show you have talent, and we'll give you options of either going directly into paid employment, going directly into apprenticeships, or rolling on to another one of our 12-week programs as we get them ready for reintegration back into general further education colleges from September. And being able to get in there and do something innovative and do something different, because we have flexibility in the money allocated within that locality, has meant that we've been able to connect with around 190 16 to 18-year-olds in the space of circa 6 months, and we've already kind of secured a 76% progression rate into something positive. And bear in mind, these are kids that if you looked at them the wrong way at the start of the program, they would they would let you know that they're not happy. So to see that impact because of the element of that devolved funding and enabling us to do what we do best is a great example of problem, funding, we step in and provide a solution, and we've changed the lives of quite a high proportion of young people. So that's an example of what we've done in Leeds, and very similar to something we did in Salford over the summer of 2024, where we were able to be allocated some money from Salford that was given to them through the UK SPF devolved funding within GMCA. And again, they wanted a 10-week summer program for 20 homeschooled young people who were struggling to be prepared to go into their local college. And we did a 10-week summer program, and again, gave them a different environment, a different type of staff, a different type of experience, and they all progressed either into an apprenticeship or a further education college course. So they're two examples of where, with the right level of funding, with the right understanding of the community, with the right offer, you can get in and make a real life-changing difference to some of the, to proportion of broken Britain. And it's a privilege to do that, and I just want to do more. So that's a couple of examples of where devolution has been quite impactful.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. So what you're saying there then, Stuart, so obviously that's a huge number of people that you're reaching, 160 people with that one and 20 young people with the others. Are you saying that if we were in the old landscape prior to the devolution, you wouldn't have been able to hit any of those? Or is it a case of all of them being possible as a result of devolution?
Well, because I'm talking about young people's education, normally what we would do is we would deliver that type of provision through our classic DFE study program contract that we've got, that we've already got with the DFE. The challenges with that contract is we don't have the flexibility in how we, because we're a national ITP and because the funding methodology is based on a lag process, that we normally want to have our contract, because we incur all the costs as a result of that delivery, by what we call RO4, which is roughly the end of October, end of November time. So therefore, that means what we mostly do is commit young people to 12-month programs or year-long programs. And of course, for some of the most challenging young people in communities, that's too long, it's too big, it's too overwhelming. They're not ready for that level of commitment. So what the devolved funding allowed us to do, and granted it was from the DFE still, but they gave us flexibility and gave it to the city council to choose the providers that they wanted to engage with. It allowed us to go in and do something different. So short, sharp, impactful programs that were suitable for that type of neat young person who needed something more nurturing, needed something more short, needed something not as overwhelming. And therefore that flexibility in the funding allowed us to do something that impacted the hardest to reach. If we just continued to do it through our normal study program contract, which we do within the West Midlands, for example, again, we have a great impact, but we're attracting a type of neat learner that are able and ready to commit to a year. And therefore there's still a proportion here that we can't get to because that type of program is just not suitable for them, and therefore they just continue being neat, continue to be a drain on society, continue to engage in stuff that is just heartbreaking to see. So that flexibility in being able to use the funding to do something specific for that community is where that was a real benefit.
Fantastic. That's great. That's such a good set of examples. Fantastic. John, would you mind sharing some of your examples as well? Because I know you've had some similarly really impactful situations that you've worked in as well.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of similarities to what Stuart's been talking about. I mean, one of the key things for us is getting access to people and giving people the opportunity to get involved in training and upskilling. And I think we used some of the multiplying money that was available in GMCA to start some engagement with local community and community organisations and schools to basically get out there and do some face-to-face workshops on basic math skills. So the schools ones were workshops that were designed for parents trying to assist their children with homework, really, was the starting point. But I think what it did was it opened the door to people to sort of give them that first introduction back into learning. And then the people that were sat in the room that then were thinking, well, no, I never would have gone back and done my maths, then all of a sudden got confidence from those face-to-face, locally based workshops to have the confidence to then then partake and start the functional skills. So I think that's the first thing. It can give you access to learners that are haven't really thought about re-engaging in skills and maybe have a little bit of apprehension about doing that. The second thing it allowed us to do is to gain new collaboration. So with the Growth Company and in particular Bolton Council. So having the introduction with them then led to other things. So we then led on to some work with some English as a second language, some community groups that were working with recovering addicts. It opened up us to the 50+ age group. So there was lots of added sort of sectors that we weren't really engaging with as frequently that it gave us that access to. And then I suppose the last one was like the strong link that, in particular, the primary school workshops that we're doing that give us into primary school education and how useful it was for schools to engage in it from an Ofsted perspective as well. So there was lots and lots of wins from it on all sides of the table, and I think that's one of the biggest strengths of it. I suppose the second one is the Job Ready programme that we run in collaboration with the council, which I know we're going to talk about the benefits and the changes to relationships with employers. But I think that's been a real success story for us, which has come about from devolution, but more about what devolution brings, which is that stronger collaboration between agencies and organisations and that genuine desire to go from start to finish. So it's not training just for training's sake, it's training because there's a specific need in the local area. In our specific example, in local authority gymnasiums, where they needed more personal trainers and qualified gym instructors to fulfil the council's service provision, really. And I suppose the devolution has allowed us to work for almost like a start to end solution, rather than just running qualifications that people access but then can't find that access into employment, and removing those barriers for people. Because I think we talked about this at the conference, the barrier to learning, there's numerous barriers to learning and barriers to employment likewise. And I think what the Job Ready programme allowed us to do was to try and bring those, or solve some of those barriers, and bring some of the access points away. So because it was at a central facility, because it was at the same facility they did their education as well as where the employment was based, as they were going through the qualification, you were breaking down those barriers because they were used to travelling into the facility. They'd met a lot of the people that they potentially were going to be working for. They had a guaranteed interview. All those little things are reasons, there might have been reasons to not partaking in employment and now been taken away. And I think that's, one of the strengths of being involved in it.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that brings us really nicely on our next question, actually, John. I wouldn't mind keeping you for a second, asking you the next part. So our next question, we wanted to find out a little bit more about those sort of working relationships, really. So you've mentioned there this sort of connect the dots type approach, and sort of a more end-to-end process where you're looking at the actual need and sort of the end result. So in terms of how you've worked with employers or how you've worked with other organisations, what sort of differences have come about in the way that you work now with those relationships, and what could you sort of share about how things have changed with the way that you work?
I think as an organisation, we've probably took more responsibility on board in terms of thinking about the qualifications we run and how then we can work with the individuals to then get them better placed. I think the employers within the area, so not only the local authority where we have a really strong link with, but the private gymnasium organisations that are in the area have then, because they've seen the success of the Job Ready scheme and they've seen people from the courses moving into full-time employment, they're then contacting us to say, you know, can we get involved? How can we offer opportunities for people that are coming off your qualifications? And, you know, again, the process starts about like trying to alleviate those boundaries, inviting them into the training courses. And so they come in on week 3 and speak to the people that are on the course, so there's that introduction straight away. Making them, again, you know, it be a compulsory interview if anybody who's qualified on the courses that we run. All those little things that make it easier for somebody to transition from one to another. I think that's the biggest key. And the big thing for us is that it's allowed, not free publicity, but it's allowed that like people to know who we are and what we're doing, and that there are a large amount of people accessing these qualifications that just need a start, really, that just need an opportunity to get into employment. And it's very, very funny, like that dot to dot is exactly the best way to describe it. Like the 2 dots have always existed. So there's always been the people in one situ that are accessing courses and training, and there's always been the employers that are there, but there's been no link between the two. And I think that's what I feel like the collaborative approach and the use of the devolved money has allowed us to do easier.
That's fantastic. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, that really sort of draws out, like you say, it's not so much about the publicity, it's about the access, isn't it?
Yeah.
The ability to access and understand what's actually there, which perhaps people weren't or didn't before. No, that's fantastic. Thank you. And Stuart, could we ask you the same as well? Could you talk a little bit about any sort of working relationships that you've had and any changes that you've noticed?
So because of our group is made up of 4 business divisions. One of our business divisions, being SCL Professional, is our home of apprenticeship. So we're quite fortunate that we've got quite an extensive list of employer partners, large and small, that we deliver apprenticeships to across England. And I guess what that has enabled us to do is, because we've got that relationship, it's allowed us to harness that relationship to look at other ways in which we can engage those, particularly those large national employers, in terms of how we can also through devolution and through different pots of money and through different projects, ensure that there's a real clear destination focused curriculum or destination focused product. So for example, we are looking at some of our larger employers sponsoring young people NEET programs, where every young person at the end of those 12 weeks will get a guaranteed interview for apprenticeships or entry-level jobs at local stores, venues, facilities that our national providers, national employers have within the localities that we're delivering. So a great example in Leeds, Iceland sponsor one of our programs. Big need for retail assistance going into there, because obviously Brexit has had an impact in certain roles now not being filled or being more available. So we've got disengaged young people who are earning money through negative ways. We've got an employer who has a real focus on corporate social values and capital. And we've got a provision and a product that can take these learners on a journey to get them into those jobs or get them into those apprenticeships. Therefore, it's allowed us to join the dots a lot better from already existing relationships with large employers. So I think that's a good example of where we've pivoted our relationships to enable everything we do to be focused on a destination or a return on that investment through whatever the combined authorities or local authorities has given us. So that's an example of where we've definitely pivoted. And I guess also we have started to think about, do we now invest in more employer engagement officers regionally, so that as we grow and as we expand our offer and evidence our impact of the combined authorities, we're hopeful that means further funding will potentially be allocated. That means that we can start really engaging further other employers that we might not necessarily have a relationship with yet. So we also it's making us think about how we invest in our infrastructure to have a real focus on that employer engagement, not just from an apprenticeship point of view, but in terms of, do we want to go into the skills bootcamp area? Do we go on to get more innovation fund from combined authorities to do real bespoke, neat projects? So there's a couple of examples of how we've really started to pivot in that space with those employers and stakeholders.
That's great. Thank you very much. So the next part that we want to think about is a little bit more about the other side of things. Obviously, we've heard a lot about the strengths, the benefits that have come about. Thinking a little bit about sort of the other side of things, what kind of barriers and challenges have you come up against? So thinking about, in particular, people who might be completely new or just starting to sort of grow with their regional funding provision. Any sort of hints and tips, I suppose, would be very useful for them. But sort of a little bit of an exploration of what kind of barriers you've come up against and how you went about tackling those. If you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about that as well, Stuart.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, you notice the examples I've been given today are all around young people. I've not talked about adults yet. So in terms of barriers and tips, I guess there's several that particularly as a large national provider, and for any ITP or provider that is also has a national footprint or has ambitions of being a national footprint, is the whole devolution, procurement, localism, potential risks of combined authority bias to local providers. We are definitely against it and on the back foot as a provider type. One of the particular barriers is the trust around ITPs has been a real challenge. I think historically ITPs have gained, some quite rightly in some cases, a reputation of they're profit making and public money shouldn't really be given to profit making organizations. I completely understand where that comes from, but I absolutely challenge that, because I also, having 15 years in a general further education college, and I love colleges, by the way, there shouldn't be a fear around profit-making organisations, because with profit becomes, simply, profit prevents passiveness but promotes pace. It gives us an energy to use public money to really invest in innovation at a pace that sometimes is needed within areas where there are problems. So I think that we've got a lot of work to do still as a sector to provide trust that whilst we do have investors, owners, whatever you want to call it, that doesn't mean that we're going to use public money, do poor quality, and then basically save as much as that money as possible in our back pockets. That's not the case, and me personally wouldn't allow that to be the case working in an ITP. So it's there's a lot of work we've got to do, and the only way you can overcome that is by working the relationships, getting on the networks, talking to the right people. But then when you get the opportunity to deliver something, deliver the best possible product you possibly can, and make sure there's very clear impact data that says, here's some public money, here's what we've done, and here's the return on investment. Because not only have they gone into jobs or apprenticeships, we also have an economic impact of, well, they're now no longer selling drugs, they're now no longer on the welfare, they're now not a drain on the NHS. There's a lot of economic impact on the wider scale that you can evidence through getting someone off out their house into a classroom and into a positive destination. So I think the trust thing is something that we've got to really, really work hard for those that work in ITP space. I think the second barrier is the whole procurement progress and the transparency and the inconsistency. Some combined authorities desires to look after their own GFEs and their own grant funded provision, and they want to make sure that they just have a localism agenda. And we do have a bit of a system where, and I mean this with the greatest respect, but it feels that the providers are prioritized over the learners, and we need a system where the learner is prioritized over the provider. So if a provider is not necessarily local but has a offer that is transformational, we should get an equal opportunity of getting some funding to showcase that impact. And I don't think that's always the case in some combined authorities, because they will traditionally rely on, do you have a postcode and a venue in our space, and are you known to us because you've done and practiced and traded there for a while? So I think there are a couple of real barriers we've got to face into, and the only way we can do this is being relentless in meeting the decision makers, getting on the networks and showcasing that we can be trusted. We have a different offer that can complement local offer, and hopefully get a chance to show them that we can make a real difference to their residents. So that's probably a few things to share. Is that have I just waffled there, MZ? Did that make sense?
Not at all. No.
Okay, thank
Not
you.
at all. No, that's really helpful. It's a few different barriers, and I can definitely feel sort of learner first approach. That's coming as a challenge to try and provide there. No, that's really helpful. John, what about for your experiences? What's been your biggest barriers? Similar or completely different for you?
Very, very similar. So I don't want to go over exactly the same points again, but completely echo what Stuart's just said. I think one of the other big things is that when you start to try and learn a centered approach. So by taking, for instance, like if I think about the multiply stuff, when we started out in the local community, obviously the people that walk through the door are not 100% au fait with the eligibility criteria for whatever funding that's aligned to it. And especially when you're on tight geographical borders and you might have people that cross from one MCA to the other, the eligibility for funding, the paperwork stuff, some of the stuff that we were doing with the ESOL learners, obviously it's very difficult to get some of the information that is required for some of the funding pots. So it's almost like there's a mass amount of flexibility in like get out there and you can do it, but then when you get out there, then being able to sort of like reference the traditional eligibility criterias is very difficult. So it's, we've got to be flexible throughout so that we get the outcome and we get the access to the people that we want, and it is learner focused. So you haven't got people coming through that you're then making a decision on whether you continue to allow access to the training, but you're probably not going to get the funding that's tied to those individual learners. And I think that's there's something in between there that needs to shift, because those people will hit some of the national agendas of trying to get people into work, but they don't quite then meet the local pot of funding eligibility that's there, if that makes sense. So it's trying to get a balance between the two.
Yeah, no, completely understand that. Stuart, did you have something to add there? I just saw your hand pop up.
Yeah, I think just to add in terms of what John's sharing as well is I give you an example. I had a brilliant meeting with the Combined Authority this morning where they're really refreshingly looking at everything they're doing with public money to make a difference to some of the problems they're facing. Again, particularly in the young people and young people NEET world and the economically challenged or inactive adult world. And they through this conversation, they were, what you also want to do. Have you spoken to some of our large colleges? We allow subcontracting. We encourage it if the offer is going to complement what they're doing. And my response to that is 100%. I've been in contact with the colleges, but the colleges they don't want to subcontract. They don't, because they know they're grant funded. They have some level of protection in a sense, and this whole concept of subcontracting going from a few years back, something that was freely open and available, but quite rightly in a minority of cases was abused, which then meant the rules were really, really tightened up, and there's been now this complete fear on subcontracting. Yet if public money is not being used effectively and there's another option to be able to allow a supplier to do that and have a greater impact on the residents that local authority or combined authority has a responsibility for, then let's subcontract. Let's stop the nonsense of the bureaucracy and the fear and the cap and whatever it is. It's about where is it going to best connect with the learner and where is it going to make the difference. And therefore, any colleges that are on this call, please realise ITPs are a safe pair of hands if you want to use money in a way that complements your existing offer, because the level of resistance to that is really, really disappointing. And I didn't realise that until I started really branching out into every combined authority and seeing that there's only a handful of colleges at the moment who really are open to new supply chains. So I think that's a real barrier that ITPs particularly need to keep facing into and trying to change the narrative and change the paradigm.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's a really, really useful addition as well. A bit more insight there. Thank you.
I think the other one as well, just to add another one in there, I think it's just that, we talked about how good collaboration is through these processes, but there's still a need for more, in terms of linking the referrals, in getting the right people, the right providers with the right people. So, some provision is right for one person, isn't right for someone else. So that diversity or that diversification of like linking the people together and almost like saying, look, for the good of the learner, that's where they should be. that's the best environment for them to learn. That's the best environment for them to succeed, which I don't think always happens. I think, that's another area that we need to be better at collectively, so that we link the right people with the right course or the right opportunity for them.
Yeah, oh, fantastic. Yeah, that brings us really nicely on our next point, actually, John. Thinking about the eligibility criteria and I suppose from labour market point of view, so that data, it's something that we didn't get a chance to touch on much before in our last discussion. So we don't need to sort of go into all of the nitty gritty of it, but just thinking a little bit about the data and the eligibility and those more specific requirements we're coming up against now. How easy has it been to use that sort of local market data in shaping your offer? Is there anywhere you can sort of draw out where it's been, really surprising or particularly useful for you?
I think that probably the best example for us on this is that we're members of the Wigan Enterprise Board, and we use that as a good vehicle for us to sort of like get a gauge on what the local need is and what skill sector areas that there's like deficiencies in, or there's a low amount in. So we've used that as a bit of a sounding board, and that's like encouraged us to pivot in new areas, and in particular digital skills is one area that we've looked at like increasing our provision on. So from that regard, that's been very useful. And that enterprise board for us, not only obviously it's got the local representation, but there's a lot of employers that are based on there. So we're getting direct feedback, you're having the direct conversations, and you're having those like, I suppose like small conversations whereby like this is the actual barrier to what we've got. We've got this gap, and we know this provision's out there or that provision's out there, but it doesn't fit because of X, Y, and Z. And I think that's where it's been useful. But again, it really relies. I mean, Stuart's mentioned it a couple of times. It relies heavily on you getting out there and having those conversations with them. There isn't a direct information canal that comes into you. You've got to go out there and find it and try and link it together. And I think that's an example of how we've done it like locally, but I wouldn't say it's the easiest thing to do.
No, that's fair enough. It's a different way of sort of processing things, isn't it? It is sort of a different demand for everyone. No, that's really helpful. Thank you. And what about for you, Stuart? Any sort of examples that would be particularly useful to share for this for you?
Yeah, so I'm blessed because I have a couple of absolute geniuses in my team who just love data and can interpret data and can come up with products as a result of that data. And I think that the real important message in this is just knowing who you are as a provider and where you want to play within that space. Because if you look at all the data available, you've got your national government priorities, you've got your LSIP priorities, you've got your combined authority strategy, you've got your local authority strategies, you've got your council priorities, and then and there's so much data. And actually what we've honed into, because we know our place in the world and we know where we want to have the greatest impact with the products that we have, I guess, in our wheelhouse, is I'm a big fan of Lightcast data. And the reason I love Lightcast data is because what that allows you to do is get to the grips of where there are jobs right now, vacant, available, and volume, and what are the hard and soft skills that underpin entry into those jobs. So it looks at if we know that there is a real demand for jobs within teaching assistants, it allows us to understand what are the common hard skills and soft skills that those applications are asking for, to enable you to develop, to refine, to be innovative with the products you're designing, to prepare, support, and develop those individuals who can then go into that marketplace, knowing, by the way, that that's the market that's available. So we use all the other data is fantastic, but I dare anyone to go and look at every combined authority strategy. I can guarantee I can tell you the top 5 things that are on there. Right, green, engineering, digital, it's all the similar stuff. And actually there's a community of adults and young people that are never at the moment going to get to that level of skill and that high kind of those high level roles and those real intense level roles. They need a entry into getting there, and they need a pathway to getting there. And therefore what's the better way is let's get them economically active, or let's stop them committing crime to earn money. Let's get them into the jobs that we know, by the way, are vacant. So we use Lightcast really effectively to develop products that then we go to the combined authorities and say, yes, there's a procurement window. Yes, we know there's a cycle. Yes, we will go for some of that stuff. But here's your problem. Here's what the data's saying. Here's what we can do. do you want to fund this? Is there some innovation fund you want to do as a pilot? So that's kind of how we utilize data. But my recommendation to anyone who is in this space is just know where you want to play and use the data that's most relevant to where you want to play. And I think that's something that we've honed into over the past 12 months.
Thank you very much. Again, which leads us very nicely on to the next part. So you're talking there, you've got some nice data savvy people that are sat there in the background going, oh, this is exactly what we need. So thinking about the next area, we're thinking about the future and where we sort of move on to. Where do you see the biggest opportunities are for innovation with devolved funding? So I've mentioned things on there like modular learning and micro credentials. And I realize that's sort of pointing things a little bit in one direction, but that specifically come up some questions that we had at the end of our workshop last time, what people were interested in finding out from you both. So any sort of opportunities at all, doesn't have to be just that area, but we have had some questions around that specifically for you both. We start with you as well, Stuart, if that's okay.
Neat. That's the best way in terms of we're facing a pandemic here of young people or adults who are economically inactive, and I think that there's going to have to be a crack in the system. There's going to have to be a response by central governments as well as combined authorities, whether that means that young people's education eventually is devolved. We know adult skills is constantly being devolved and continues to be devolved. So in terms of innovation, and I'm not a massive fan of innovation, because sometimes you can be innovative but not have the impact you want on the actual people. That sometimes it's just okay to go, there are low level skills that need to be developed to help people into something that's going to allow them to be better and more positive citizens for their communities. So I think using data to understand where we can get people into work or apprenticeships, or where we can re-engage them back into higher levels of study, particularly where the GFEs do a stunning job from level 2, level 3 upwards, is a real opportunity, I think, for providers like us or providers who are in this space to come up with short, sharp, dare I say, traineeship style programs that are funded by combined authorities or local authorities, depending on what that looks like, trailblazers, innovation funds, etc. So I think there's a real opportunity there. And I also think there's an opportunity, and I don't know whether the combined authorities will ever fund this, but I think there's also a real problem with, we get them into work, but if the employers aren't prepared to deal with some of the challenges that those young people or adults are coming with as a result of their background and their history to date, they can end up leaving, getting sacked, they end up falling out of the and become neat again. And therefore, is there something around employer coaches, employer mentors, training within employers to help them understand the challenges that some young people and adults present and actually see through that behaviour? Because no one's born that way. No one's born making these decisions. They're a byproduct of their environment, right? And that's tragic. So I think it's something around how we can help employers sustain destinations, and what does that look like, and are the authorities interested in funding that? Because we get them into work, if they fall out, they become a drain on the economy again. So we're just getting that negative cycle. So I think there's something there that might be worth exploring.
Absolutely. No, that's raises a really good point, actually. It's that continuity of support and care, isn't it? Once that sharp hit is done and dusted, it's what comes next. No, that's a great point. John, what about for you?
Yeah, I think mine's the second point that Stuart's making. It's the retention and inspiration to continue. I think it's the big area where I could see this working, and the ability to assess people and look at people and then give them bite-sized opportunities to pivot, so that they might start in one form of employment. You know, I think the days have gone where, you know, someone started at a company at 18, 19 and has 25 years service. You know, the likelihood is people are going to move. You know, if you talk about career pathing, you know, squiggly pathing and all these fancy phrases, but that's the reality of the workplace at the moment. And I think this is where you could have the flexibility to offer opportunities through micro credentials, through short pieces of learning, through short courses, to allow people to pivot, remain like within employment, create more aspiration in them. And I think by creating aspiration in people who are currently employed, it has a knock-on effect to the next generation. You know, if they're looking at people and seeing that people are actually engaged, inspired by going to work and getting up and going somewhere where they feel like they're making a difference and that they're getting something back from, then that inspires people to want to go to work. And I think it's a bit of a circle, and I think that's one area that this type of funding could help.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Stuart, I just see your hand pop up there. Do you want to add something on?
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking why John's talking as well. Is we one of the apprenticeships and one of the spaces we're in is teacher training, and there is something and I'm happy to share that we're having conversations now around teaching is different in terms of the needs of our young people and adults has evolved even over the past 3 years, like in terms of the different generations coming through, the different expectations, the challenges, the baggage, the life scars, and teaching needs to look different. And I think there is something that around opportunities, whether that's through devolved funding, whether that's through just innovation of curriculum with current funding streams, around this social coach concept. Actually, what is more important in this day and age? Someone who is got high quality pedagogy but don't have the behavior resilience or open-mindedness to see through some of the behaviors that some young people and adults present, or is that more important at the moment than the art and the craft of teaching? Or is there a hybrid here? Do we have an opportunity of helping our teachers and trainers within this space understand that their style, their practice, their resilience, their mindset has to change? And therefore, are we more social coaches now, or are we still teachers? And I think there's something there that's quite an interesting thing to explore. And I know we are personally exploring that as an organisation at the moment, because there's no denying the game's changed. The kids and adults are different, and we've got to either adapt or continue to compound the NEET problem, because we're giving up on them very quickly because they're not controlled to our level of expectation. So that's something that's probably worth sharing as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's all those sort of threads coming together, isn't it, to look at that bigger picture approach? Definitely. Okay. So giving you a bit of a tricky question there. For the next one, what we want to think about is, if you did have a wish list, we're trying to condense everything that we've been looking at just there. What would be the most helpful thing from your point of view? So for the next phase of devolution, whether that's from government or awarding bodies like ourselves at MCFE, what would be the thing that would help you the most with flexibility and local impact? What would you like to see? John, if we started with you.
Yeah, I think it's like, in terms of the barriers that we talked about earlier, it's like, like allowing more access, allowing a greater flexibility in the procurement process, allowing that geographical constraints to be looked at. So if you write on a border line and there's an activity taking place in one geographical region, how can that be supported? I feel like, like almost like a little bit more of a channeled point of contact of, what is the need, what is the desire, what is the information, that almost that one-stop shop where you can go to and say, right, this is what we're thinking of doing, this is what our local region's telling us, how do we do it? Who's the person that we can go to find that answer out and just gain that clarification on, really. Because it's very difficult when you're trying to navigate right across the sector to find out exactly where your little bit fits into what's out there. And I just think that, the more that we can bring the dots together, the better, really.
Oh, absolutely. That's great. Yeah, that's really clear. Thank you. And for Stuart, if you were to sort of condense it as well, what is it for you that you'd be looking for? What would help the most?
I guess a policy, a procurement system, a process, and a mindset that prioritize what's right for the learner above and beyond the provider. I think that's something that from a headline point of view is an absolute essential next step, is that what public money has to go to where it's going to connect with the learner and have the impact on the learner the most. And therefore there's a lot, I had this conversation with the DFE quite a lot, I think DFE get a tough time sometimes. I don't understand it, because they're subject to treasury decisions, right? And the conversation we have with the DFE is that we're not asking for more money. What we're asking for is a fairness of where that money is being utilised, because there's so much that is either given back, clawed back, not spent, and yet all of that could be redistributed to providers like ourselves and others on this call that can then spend that to have a real impact on the lives of those residents. So a process that puts the learner above the provider and where that money goes is going to be critical if we're truly going to make some of the changes that this country needs. A great example,
Thank you.
MZ, is I'm sorry, what's happened in Leeds and Manchester recently, where colleges have had a ring fence £10 million plus £300 million capital investment, ring fence to colleges. ITPs can't even touch that. Yet, with the greatest respect, probably take a couple of years to build a new building, and most likely they're just going to fill it with level 3 and level 4. And yet there's providers like us who have 8 venues within that locality that we can't fill because we don't have the money or the funding to fill it. So just imagine if we had 2 million of that, we could use the facilities that do exist now to deliver the impact that so it's things like that has to start being played through.
No, that makes perfect sense. I can hear the frustration there in just wanting to do what's best for the learner. I really can.
100%. Well, that's why we're in the game, right? Why do you come into this sector if it's not to change lives, right?
Absolutely. I think that's why everyone is in this sector, really, isn't it? And that brings us on our last question, which we've sort of added on there, but I'll be remiss not to ask it because we've had a lot of questions about this one. There has been quite a lot of conversation about sort of recent funding. We're touching on that side of things today. Obviously, so we've got non-devolved areas seeing a 6% cut to the Adult Skills Fund. We've got devolved areas with 3% reduction or thereabouts. Again, if we could just summarise, what's your reflections on this? Do you see that making much of a difference for your planning, partnerships, or the ability to sort of meet your local skills needs, this change? We start off with you, John, if that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously always a worry and a concern when funding starts to go down. In whatever area you're working in, we have a strong adult provision, and we see a growing need for it. So it going down is never a good sign. It obviously then makes we've got programs that are running that are really successful that we would want more funding for, but by obviously the amounts going down, you're having to then spend time looking at how are you going to pivot, how are you going to refund it in a different way, how are you going to slightly change your offering or bend your offering to fit what the new rules and structures are, and sometimes then you find yourself almost trying to get a square box into a round hole just to meet the provision of the learners that you've got. So that's probably where I sit on it. It's one of those things. It seems to be right across the board that there's obviously cuts that are taking place, and it's just about trying to manage that, I suppose.
No, thank you. No, I think that's all really valid points. But at the moment, there's no sort of panic stations. There's plans to sort of take action as a result of that. That's great. It's really helpful. And for you, Stuart?
Oh, well, we're facing the impact now. So we've had £800,000 of our national contract taken off us for next year because we've delivered in areas that this year are being devolved, and so that's £800,000 of impactful education that we now have to procure for when the newly devolved combined authorities go out for their ASF, and we've got no guarantee of getting that back again because they may just want to look after their grant funded providers. So we're facing this now. We've got costs in the business. We've lost £800,000. We've got in study program, because we've not been given our growth or all of our growth from the DFE. We're potentially looking at turning away 250 young people from our programs. So we're in this now, and I think that this is why something has to give, something has to change, because if not, the only people that suffer are learners and residents and the community that we serve. So if there's any providers on this call who wants to talk to SCL about potentially being a supplier of adult skills in their study program contract, come and talk to us, because we're facing now circa a £1.8 million funding loss because of decisions that have been made in central government due to devolution. So tough times. The only thing you can do is be positive and find solutions, and just keep the hunger in your belly to go, well, we've got to find a solution, because I can't wake up looking in the mirror thinking I'm failing those adults and those young people. So that's kind of where we are at the moment.
No, that's I think that's probably going to be echoed by a lot of people on this call, to be honest. I mean, no one wants to see changes and reductions in funding, but it sounds as though, like you say, keeping at it, keeping positive is one side of it, but also having plans in place to be able to sort of mitigate as much as possible. It sounds like you're both well on your way with that. So that's fantastic to hear. Which actually brings us to the end of the questions that we have. We've only got a couple of minutes left, but I just basically wanted to open it up to anyone, if there's any notes in the chat, any questions, or any sort of last questions from anyone if they want to ask. Because it's been really, really useful. Got a lot of information there. And I know sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming with that much information, but if there is any questions from anyone. No, I think that's I think that could be us. Well, thank you, especially to the panel. Thank you to Stuart and John, to Andy for the introduction as well, and to our team in the background going through the slides for us, Marcus and Laura. Thank you. So thank you all very much for coming. What will happen after this session is we'll send out the recording, so you will have access to that as well. And if you do have any questions as well, we could pop to the next page. Andy, I think that's on. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. If you do have any questions, our contact details are there. You can get in touch, and do expect the video to be coming out, so you'll be able to watch back, particularly if you haven't been able to watch the whole session as well. But thank you all very much for coming. It's been fantastic to have you. And thanks again to the panel for all of the insight. Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Have a great rest of your week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.